Savannah, Georgia. Summer of 2019. The air felt thick enough to chew, sweet with magnolia and grief. The funeral home smelled like lilies and furniture polish, and the air conditioner hummed louder than the preacher. My husband, Harold Johnson, lay there looking too peaceful for a man who left behind so much unfinished business. I sat in the second pew, clutching a damp handkerchief, not from crying but from trying not to. My daughter, Vanessa, stood by the casket like a queen at a parade, accepting condolences, every eyelash in place. She wore a sleek black dress and those gold earrings I once saved up to buy for her graduation. I'd never seen her stand so tall, or so far away from me. People kept saying, "Your father would be proud." And she smiled, practiced and polished. I just nodded, wondering what he'd really be proud of. When the preacher called family forward, she gave me a small, tight smile, like a hostess trying to seat an unwanted guest. We buried him under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain. The clouds hung heavy, the sun broke through once and then disappeared. I thought that was fitting. Harold always made quick appearances in our lives before ducking back into business trips, meetings, and deals. I stood there, my hands trembling as I dropped a white rose onto the coffin, whispering, "Rest, Harold. Maybe now you'll finally be still." Vanessa didn't look at me once. The next week, the lawyer's office smelled of lemon polish and old paper. I wore my best Sunday dress, navy blue with the white collar Harold used to say made me look like a proper woman. Vanessa arrived late, carrying a designer purse big enough to fit my entire life inside it. She was on the phone laughing with someone, and when she hung up she said, "Sorry, Mama, traffic was crazy." She didn't sound sorry. I looked at her, trying to see the little girl who used to beg me to braid her hair before school. All I saw was Harold's chin and that same calculating look he used when he was closing a deal. Mr. Crawford, the attorney, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, Miss Johnson, your husband's will is straightforward." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile men use when they know bad news is coming. "The primary estate, including the house on Willow Street, the investment portfolio, and the vacation property in Charleston, goes to your daughter, Vanessa." I blinked. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and amused. Mr. Crawford kept talking, the words falling heavy as stones. "As for you, Mrs. Johnson, your husband left you the lake cabin in Hardin County. He noted it as a place of peace and reflection." I laughed, not the happy kind, the kind that sounds like it's breaking. "That old cabin with the leaking roof? The one full of spiders?" Vanessa sighed like she was tired of the whole charade. "Mama, Daddy probably thought you'd like it quiet. You've always said you didn't care for all the noise of the city." Mr. Crawford slid a paper across the table. "I didn't touch it. There's also a small account tied to the cabin, just for maintenance." "How small?" I asked. $50,000. Vanessa smiled wide then, like it was generous. "See? Daddy took care of you. $50,000. After 38 years of marriage. After nursing him through 2 surgeries. After sitting up nights while he built his company from nothing." I felt the room tilt. "And he left you everything else?" I asked, my voice a whisper. She shrugged. "He trusted me to handle things. Maybe he thought you'd want to rest, Mama." "Rest?" I repeated. "After building that life with him?" She didn't flinch. "You never cared about money anyway." That was true once. I cared about people, about family. About keeping my daughter's shoes clean and her father's clothes pressed. About Sunday dinners and love that felt safe. But at that moment, sitting in that shiny office with the lemon smell and the sound of Vanessa tapping her nails, I realized what a fool I'd been. When it was done, I walked out into the hot Savannah air and felt it slap my face like judgment. The sunlight hit the courthouse steps, too bright to look at. I thought about the years I spent keeping Harold's books when he couldn't afford an accountant. The nights I stayed awake when the power was off, praying bills would wait another week. I thought about the smile on Vanessa's face as she hugged the lawyer goodbye. The next morning, she came to the old house, her car engine purring like a spoiled cat. "Mama, I know this is hard," she said, standing in my living room like a realtor about to redecorate. "But it's better this way. You don't have to worry about upkeep or taxes. I can handle everything." "And where am I supposed to live, Vanessa?" She gave a small laugh, high and sharp. "The cabin's not that bad. I had a guy go check it out. Says it just needs some cleaning." Fresh start, Mama. You'll love it. Fresh start, I said quietly. Don't look at me like that, she said. You've had everything your way long enough. Daddy left me in charge, and I intend to do things right. By kicking me out my own home? She stepped closer, the perfume on her too strong, expensive and cold. This isn't your home anymore. You've got the cabin. Take it or leave it. But you can't stay here. I looked around, the photos on the wall, the lace curtains I'd sewn, the smell of lemon oil on the wooden banister. You can't talk to me like that, Vanessa. Her voice rose, sharp as broken glass. Then go live with the pigs, Mama. That's what you always said about that place, right? Well, now it's yours. Go live with them. For a moment I just stood there. My daughter, my only child, looked at me like I was a burden she'd finally dropped. Something inside me broke, but something else started to burn. I packed my things slowly. Old clothes, a few family photos, Harold's watch. I didn't ask for help. She didn't offer. As I closed the front door behind me, I heard her phone ringing inside. Her laughter spilling out like nothing had happened. The drive to Hardin County took 2 hours. The cabin sat at the edge of a lake gone green with algae, the porch sagging like tired shoulders. The paint peeled in long curls, and the steps creaked under my feet. Inside smelled like dust and damp wood. I set down my suitcase and sat on an old chair that had probably been here since the 80s. Through the window, the sun was bleeding into the trees, gold and angry. I could have cried, but I didn't. I made a cup of instant coffee on the old stove and sat on the porch while the crickets tuned up for the night. Across the lake, fireflies blinked like tiny stars, and I thought about how many years I'd spent shrinking myself to make others comfortable. Harold, Vanessa, even the church ladies who said, "Loretta, you're so patient." Patient. That word had turned into a chain. I looked at the reflection of the sky on the lake, the water trembling under the wind. Somewhere inside the house, a floorboard groaned like it was remembering. I smiled a little. If she thinks I'm done, I said to the night, she don't know what kind of woman raised her. And for the first time in a long while I meant every word. The first week at the cabin felt like a punishment wrapped in silence. The mornings came slow, heavy with fog that smelled of wet pine and rust. The floor creaked like it remembered better days, and the roof whined when rain started to fall. I'd wake before sunrise, make weak coffee on that old gas stove, and stare out at the lake while steam curled from my mug like ghosts rising from the water. Every sound, the buzz of a mosquito, the hum of a passing truck on the distant road, felt like a reminder of how far I'd fallen. But somewhere between sweeping mouse droppings off the floor and patching a hole in the porch screen, the shame started to burn into something harder. On the third day I went into town. Hardin County hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same feed store, the same barbecue joint, the same old men outside the hardware shop arguing about weather like it was politics. I walked into Ruby's diner mostly because I recognized the sign, and because I couldn't stand another meal of canned beans. The place smelled like bacon grease and hope. Ruby herself was still behind the counter, wide as ever, her smile warmer than the biscuits she served. "Well, Lord have mercy," she said, squinting at me. "If it ain't Loretta Mae Johnson. Thought you'd moved to the big city for good." I sat down at the counter and smiled a little. The city moved on without me. Ruby poured me coffee without asking. "That husband of yours still alive?" "Buried him last week." She clucked her tongue, sliding me a plate of eggs. "Sorry, baby. I know y'all had history." I almost laughed. "History, yes. A whole museum of it." She nodded slowly. "You'll be all right. You always were." By the end of breakfast, she'd offered me a few shifts waiting tables. "It's not much," she said, "but you'll have some cash in your pocket and folks to talk to." I took it. The next day, I was in an apron refilling coffee and wiping down tables. My hands hurt, my feet swelled, but it felt good, honest work, no pretense. At night, I'd come home, light a candle because the bulbs flickered, and go through old boxes Harold had left behind. Photos, tax returns, receipts, business ledgers. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I hadn't imagined our life, that I'd been more than his shadow. One night, digging through a fishing tackle box, I found a flash drive wrapped in masking tape. "Cabin project," it said in Harold's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before plugging it into the old laptop Vanessa had once called ancient. The screen flickered to life, showing folders labeled with dates, numbers, and a name I didn't recognize. Blackwater Holdings LLC. First, I thought it was another one of his side businesses. Harold had always been full of schemes, land flipping, rental units, offshore accounts I wasn't supposed to ask about. But this folder had detailed maps, geological surveys, and letters from some oil company representative. They were dated nearly 10 years ago. My heart thudded slow and hard. I scrolled down to an email draft he'd never sent. It read, "Loretta deserves the mineral rights. I can't keep this secret forever. If she ever finds this, tell her the cabin isn't what it seems." I leaned back in the chair, breath caught between anger and disbelief. I thought about that lawyer, about Vanessa's smug face as she signed the papers. I thought about all the years Harold told me not to worry about men's business. Maybe he'd hidden something from both of us. The next morning I drove into town again. My old Buick rattled like a can full of bolts, but it made it. I found Ella Whitmore's office across from the courthouse, the sign faded but proud. Whitmore and Associates, attorney at law. Ella had been a legend in Savannah once. A no-nonsense black woman who sued banks for discrimination and won. When Harold had first hired her years ago for a contract dispute, I'd liked her immediately. She looked up as I stepped in, her glasses low on her nose. "Loretta Johnson," she said, standing. "Girl, I thought you vanished." "I almost did," I said. "Got something I need your eyes on." I handed her the flash drive and explained everything, the will, the cabin, the insult. She didn't interrupt, just nodded and clicked through the files. After a few minutes she looked up, her eyes sharp as knives. "You realize what this is? Something Harold didn't want Vanessa to find, I guess." "More than that," she said. "These documents show he bought mineral rights for this land. Oil exploration leases, early-stage development. The company offered him millions, but the deal stalled because the state required the owner's signature. And guess who owns the land now?" I stared at her. "Me." She smiled slow. "You." We spent the rest of the afternoon digging deeper. She printed documents, took notes, made copies. I hadn't felt that alive in months. When I got home, the sunset painted the lake orange and red, and I stood there barefoot on the porch, watching the colors dance on the water. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I didn't feel small. Over the next week, Ella helped me file preliminary claims to secure the mineral rights. Vanessa's name wasn't on a single page. Meanwhile, word got around town that Miss Loretta's place might be sitting on something valuable. Ruby teased me every morning. "You strike oil yet, millionaire?" I just smile and say, "Patience, Ruby, patience." One afternoon while I was cleaning out the back shed, I found something else. An old strongbox under the floorboards, covered in dust and spiderwebs. Inside were Harold's notebooks, letters addressed to me but never mailed, and a small velvet pouch with my name embroidered on it. Inside was a gold chain I'd thought long lost, and a folded letter dated the year before he died. The handwriting trembled, uneven. "Loretta, if you're reading this, I didn't do right by you. Vanessa got my charm but not your heart. The cabin land, don't sell it. It's your redemption. Everything else is noise." I sat on that floor, the smell of earth and memory all around me, and cried for the first time since his death. Not for losing him, but for realizing how little I'd known about what he left behind. The next day I met Ella again. She was smiling before I even sat down. "Loretta," she said, "I ran property values on the mineral rights. If those reports are accurate, we're talking 7 figures. I blinked. 7 figures? She nodded. Maybe more, if the company still wants to drill. My hands shook. So that means? It means that tiny cabin your daughter mocked might just be sitting on more money than her entire inheritance. I felt laughter bubble up in my chest, the kind that feels like oxygen after drowning. "Well," I said, "ain't that poetic?" That night I walked out to the edge of the lake, the moon silvering the water. The frogs croaked, the wind whispered through the trees, and I whispered back, "You gave me a cabin, Harold, but you also gave me a chance." The anger inside me didn't fade, it sharpened. Vanessa had taken my house, my pride, my place in the world. But she hadn't taken my fire. I looked across that dark water and said softly, "You wanted a war, baby girl? You just picked the wrong woman." The morning after I learned what that land was worth, the air around the cabin felt different, heavier, watchful. Even the birds were quiet, Like the whole forest knew something had shifted. I drove into town to meet Ella again, wearing my best blouse, the one with little pearl buttons that Harold used to say made me look respectable. On the way, my phone buzzed. Vanessa's name flashing like a warning light. I almost let it ring out, but curiosity won. "Mama," she said, her voice sweet and sharp at the same time. "Why's a lawyer calling me about the cabin deed?" I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. She'd found out faster than I expected. "Maybe because it's my land," I said. "And I plan on keeping it that way." She laughed short, ugly. "You can't do anything with that dump. Sell it, take the pity money and move on." I hung up before she could say more. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. At Ella's office, I told her about the call. She frowned, pushing her glasses higher. "She's going to fight back," she said. "If there's one thing I've learned about greed, it don't like surprises." We spent hours filing paperwork, claim petitions, mineral rights protections, and letters to the oil company listed in Harold's old emails. I didn't understand half the legal terms, but I understood one thing clearly. I had something worth fighting for now. A few days later, I came home from the diner to find tire tracks in the mud by my porch. The door was open, the lock splintered. My heart dropped into my shoes. Inside, the place looked ransacked. Drawers dumped, papers scattered. Even the framed photo of Harold and me from our wedding cracked in half. My hand shook as I called Ella. "Someone's been here." She told me to call the sheriff. He came an hour later, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave. He took notes, nodded politely, but I could tell he wasn't taking it serious. "Probably just kids," he said. "Cabin like this, folks think it's abandoned." I looked at him and said, "Those kids picked the one box with legal documents and left everything else. You call that random?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I'll file a report, ma'am." When he left, I sat on the porch steps, holding that cracked wedding photo and whispered, "You raised her wrong, Harold. You raised her to think money makes her bulletproof." The next morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in Vanessa's neat, cold handwriting. Inside were court papers. She'd filed a motion to challenge the will, claiming mental duress and undue influence from me during Harold's final years. Reading those words felt like being slapped. She was trying to paint me as a manipulative widow who tricked her dying husband. I drove straight to Ella's office, shaking so bad I could hardly shift gears. Ella read the papers, sighed, and said, "She's playing dirty, but we'll match her blow for blow." That week was a blur of courthouse visits, signatures, and sleepless nights. Vanessa showed up at one of the hearings, looking radiant and righteous in her tailored suit. When she passed me, she whispered, "You should have just stayed quiet." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You should have just said thank you." The judge postponed the case pending evidence review, and I walked out feeling like my heart had been scraped raw. Back at the cabin, I started noticing little things. My phone battery dying overnight even when unplugged. A black SUV parked down the road more than once. Once I found footprints in the soft dirt near the back door, too large to be mine. I wasn't paranoid, I was being watched. Ella told me to keep everything locked and document everything. "Vanessa's got money and pride," she said. "That's a dangerous mix." Then came the day the oil company called. "Mrs. Johnson," the man said, his voice polished like he'd practiced it, "we've received your attorney's inquiry. We'd like to discuss a potential lease agreement, pending verification of ownership." I nearly dropped the phone. He mentioned numbers, royalty percentages, exploratory drilling, numbers that made my head spin. "So the land is valuable?" I asked. "Extremely," he said. "But we need to confirm there are no legal disputes." My stomach clenched. Vanessa's challenge could ruin everything. The next Sunday, I went to church in town for the first time since Harold's death. The choir sang, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and I sat in the back, hands trembling. People smiled at me kindly, but I felt hollow. After service, Pastor Lewis came over, tall and gentle as always. "Loretta May," he said, "heard you've been going through trials." I nodded. "Just trying to keep my peace, Pastor." He smiled. "Sometimes peace comes after the storm, not before it." His words stuck with me all week. A few days later, Ella called. "She's escalating," she said. "Her lawyers filed an emergency injunction to freeze your property rights." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Can they do that? Temporarily, she said. But I'm countering it. You hold on, Loretta. We're not losing this. I wanted to believe her. That night rain came hard, pounding the tin roof like drumbeats. I sat by the window watching lightning streak across the lake and thought about how storms always passed, no matter how long they stayed. The next morning Vanessa herself showed up. Her fancy car crunched gravel like bones. She stepped out wearing heels that didn't belong anywhere near dirt. You need to stop, she said before I could even speak. You're embarrassing yourself. Daddy didn't mean for you to twist things this way. I crossed my arms. Funny, since I'm the one with his signature and his letter. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand how business works. I smiled. Maybe not, but I understand right from wrong. She took a step closer, her perfume cutting through the damp air. You're old, Mama. Tired. Just let it go. Her voice dropped lower. If you push me, I'll bury you in court. I met her stare and said, You'll have to dig deep, baby, 'cause I'm not afraid of dirt. She turned on her heel, got in her car and sped off, throwing gravel behind her like smoke. I stood there, heart pounding, watching the dust settle. That night, I locked every door and window, double-checked the flash drive, and put it in the church safe the next morning. Days turned into weeks. The town started whispering, folks at the diner, at the salon, even at church. Some said I was crazy for challenging my own daughter. Others said I was brave. I didn't care what they said. I was fighting for the truth now, not just money. Then one evening, Ella called with her voice trembling in excitement. Loretta, we found something. A transfer of funds from Harold's account to Vanessa's name 6 months before he died. $200,000, labeled personal reimbursement. If that was tied to the will, it's fraud. My knees nearly gave out. You sure? Positive, she said. We're submitting it tomorrow. I hung up, leaned against the wall and laughed until I cried. For the first time in years I felt the tide turning. I walked outside barefoot in the cool dirt and looked up at the moon. You thought you buried me, I whispered to the wind. But I was planting roots. Then, as if on cue, headlights flared down the road, bright, fast, coming straight toward the cabin. I froze. The car stopped short, engine idling, then reversed and vanished into the dark. My pulse raced. The war wasn't over, it was just getting started. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax, the kind of smell that carries history in it. I sat there in my Sunday best, hands folded tight in my lap, while Vanessa whispered to her lawyer, perfectly composed in her cream suit. She looked more like a TV anchor than a grieving daughter. I kept my eyes forward, not because I was afraid of her, but because I needed to stay calm. Ella sat beside me, steady and unshakable, tapping her pen against her notebook like a metronome. Just breathe, Loretta, she whispered. Truth got its own kind of timing. I nodded, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. The judge entered, his robe sweeping the floor like a curtain call, and everyone stood. When he told us to sit, I could feel Vanessa's eyes burning holes in the side of my face. Her lawyer started first, painting her like a victim in a family tragedy. My client only wishes to protect her late father's legacy, he said, voice slick and rehearsed. She believes Mrs. Johnson, he paused, glancing at me, may have influenced her father's state of mind in his final months. I wanted to laugh. Influence him? The man barely spoke to me unless it was about dinner or bills. But I kept my mouth shut. Ella had told me, let them talk first. The more rope they take, the more they'll hang themselves. When it was Ella's turn, she stood slow, adjusting her jacket like a boxer cracking her knuckles. Your Honor, she began, my client isn't fighting for greed. She's fighting for dignity. After 38 years of marriage, she was left with what everyone assumed was worthless land. But that land is worth more than any checkbook, because it carries her husband's true intent, and we have the proof. Then she opened a folder so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. Inside were Harold's handwritten letters, his email drafts, the mineral deeds, and that damning bank transfer to Vanessa. The judge leaned forward. Is that verified? Ella nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The funds were moved while Mr. Johnson was on medication that impaired judgment. We have testimony from his physician and the bank records to match. Vanessa's face changed then. The calm cracked just a little. She whispered something to her lawyer, but he didn't look so sure anymore. Ella continued, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Mr. Johnson clearly stated in these documents that the land, specifically the cabin property, was to remain in his wife's name due to prior guilt and personal restitution. He called it, in his own words, Loretta's redemption. She paused, looking directly at Vanessa. Redemption doesn't come cheap, but it comes honest. The judge asked for a recess to review the new evidence. During that break, Vanessa cornered me in the hallway, her voice low but trembling with rage. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed. I turned to her slowly. "Do what, baby? Tell the truth." "You're ruining my life," she snapped. I almost felt sorry for her then, almost. "You did that yourself," I said softly. "I just stopped covering for you." When court resumed, the judge looked tired but clear-eyed. After reviewing the evidence, it's apparent that Mr. Johnson made specific arrangements for this property and its attached mineral rights to remain in Mrs. Johnson's possession. Furthermore, financial irregularities suggest an improper influence on the drafting of the secondary will by Ms. Johnson. Until those funds are accounted for, her inheritance is hereby frozen. The gavel hit the wood like thunder. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I didn't smile. I just exhaled for the first time in weeks. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, like the world had been scrubbed clean. Reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't the kind of story that made the papers, but I felt like the whole town could hear the verdict anyway. Ella patted my shoulder. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "We did it." She smiled. "What will you do now?" I looked up at the wide Georgia sky, blue as redemption. "Go home," I said. The next morning I drove back to the cabin. The gravel popped under the tires like applause. For once the place didn't look so sad. The porch was still crooked, but it felt sturdy under my feet. I sat in the rocking chair Harold had built years ago, closed my eyes and listened to the lake. The air smelled of pine and rain, clean and new. I could almost hear his voice saying, "Loretta, don't let that girl turn you bitter." I smiled. "Too late for that," I whispered, but the truth was I wasn't bitter anymore. I was free. Over the next few weeks things changed fast. The oil company sent their engineers to survey the land. Big trucks rolled in with men in hard hats and clipboards. The town folks started visiting, curious and polite. Ruby came by one morning bringing biscuits and gossip. "Girl, they say you sittin' on liquid gold," she said, laughing. I laughed with her. "Guess the pigs got lucky," I said, and we both nearly choked from laughing so hard. Vanessa didn't come around again. Not for weeks, not even to collect her things from the city house. Then one afternoon a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew her handwriting like my own. Inside just one line. "I didn't know he loved you more. I'm sorry." I folded it neatly and tucked it in my Bible. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but I prayed on it anyway. Not for her sake, for mine. When the drilling started, I stood on the porch watching the machines dig into the earth. The ground trembled, but I wasn't afraid. The sun was rising, painting the lake gold. I thought about all the times I'd begged Harold to come home earlier, all the nights I'd sat alone waiting for his headlights. Maybe this was his way of coming home after all. Not with flowers or apologies, but with something real. The first royalty check came in the mail a month later. I didn't tell anyone the amount, but it had more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. I took a deep breath, put the check on the table, and laughed until tears rolled down my face. I used to think money couldn't heal anything, but it could sure buy you peace of mind. The cabin got new paint, new plumbing, a new roof. I even hired local kids to help plant flowers along the porch. The place looked alive again. Some nights I'd sit outside with a glass of sweet tea, listening to the crickets sing. Sometimes I'd picture Vanessa as a little girl again, running barefoot through the yard, laughing like the world belonged to her. I didn't hate her anymore. I pitied her. Money without heart is a curse, and I'd learned that the hard way. One Sunday, Pastor Lewis came to visit. He stood by the lake, looking out at the water glittering in the sun. "You've been blessed," he said quietly. "You think Harold knew what he was doing?" I nodded. He might not have known how to love right, but he knew how to make things right. Pastor smiled. "Redemption's a strange thing. Comes when we least expect it." When he left, I stayed on the porch watching the sun dip low. The air was warm, the sky streaked in orange and rose. I thought about every insult, every tear, every moment I'd felt invisible. All of it had led me here, to this porch, this peace, this power. My hands, once rough from scrubbing floors, now held my own future. As the first stars came out, I whispered to the dark, "You thought the cabin was my punishment. Turns out it was my resurrection." The wind moved through the trees, soft and sure, like it agreed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to save me. I'd already saved myself. Over the next few weeks, things changed fast. The oil company sent their engineers to survey the land. Big trucks rolled in with men in hard hats and clipboards. The townfolk started visiting, curious and polite. Ruby came by one morning bringing biscuits and gossip. "Girl, they say you sittin' on liquid gold," she said, laughing. I laughed with her. "Guess the pigs got lucky," I said, and we both nearly choked from laughing so hard. Vanessa didn't come around again. Not for weeks, not even to collect her things from the city house. Then one afternoon a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew her handwriting like my own. Inside, just one line. "I didn't know he loved you more. I'm sorry." I folded it neatly and tucked it in my Bible. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but I prayed on it anyway. Not for her sake, for mine. When the drilling started, I stood on the porch watching the machines dig into the earth. The ground trembled, but I wasn't afraid. The sun was rising, painting the lake gold. I thought about all the times I'd begged Harold to come home earlier, all the nights I'd sat alone waiting for his headlights. Maybe this was his way of coming home after all. Not with flowers or apologies, but with something real. The first royalty check came in the mail a month later. I didn't tell anyone the amount, but it had more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. I took a deep breath, put the check on the table, and laughed until tears rolled down my face. I used to think money couldn't heal anything, but it could sure buy you peace of mind. The cabin got new paint, new plumbing, a new roof. I even hired local kids to help plant flowers along the porch. The place looked alive again. Some nights I'd sit outside with a glass of sweet tea, listening to the crickets sing. Sometimes I'd picture Vanessa as a little girl again, running barefoot through the yard, laughing like the world belonged to her. I didn't hate her anymore. I pitied her. Money without heart is a curse, and I'd learned that the hard way. One Sunday, Pastor Lewis came to visit. He stood by the lake, looking out at the water glittering in the sun. "You've been blessed," he said quietly. "You think Harold knew what he was doing?" I nodded. He might not have known how to love right, but he knew how to make things right. Pastor smiled. "Redemption's a strange thing. Comes when we least expect it." When he left, I stayed on the porch watching the sun dip low. The air was warm, the sky streaked in orange and rose. I thought about every insult, every tear, every moment I'd felt invisible. All of it had led me here, to this porch, this peace, this power. My hands, once rough from scrubbing floors, now held my own future. As the first stars came out, I whispered to the dark, "You thought the cabin was my punishment. Turns out it was my resurrection." The wind moved through the trees, soft and sure, like it agreed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to save me. I'd already saved myself.